Yeah, the live stream's on.
Great, thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's Family and Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Thursday, the 1st of April at 10 a.m. And this is being held as a virtual meeting. If I can ask that everyone remains on mute unless they have a question to ask, in which case put your hand up either virtually or physically, and I'll point to you accordingly. So we'll start the meeting off. Firstly, can I just check, when the pack was sent out, there was an error in printing and everyone was sent an email with the update on with a missing item. Did anyone not receive that missing item? Is everyone okay with that? Okay, thank you. So item 1, apologies for absence.
Chair, I've received apologies from Lynn Houghton and Paul Rickard.
Thank you for that, Leslie. Item 2, disclosure of members' interests. Do we have any disclosures to declare today? Yes, Liz?
I don't know if it's a disclosure as such, but just to let everyone know that I do now sit on the North of Tyne Scrutiny Committee. Okay,
thanks, Liz. There are no minutes for the last meeting because they weren't confirmed and ready to go out. They will appear in the next meeting in June. So we'll move to item 3, which is the forward plan.
Yeah, the forward plan at this point is just for members to note. Okay,
thanks, Chris. In that case, item 4. Education and Inclusive Economy Portfolio, North of Tyne Combined Authority. And I'm going to pass that to Audrey to do that report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. You will recall at the previous Family and Children's Services Committee that you requested an update and a North of Tyne report that gave you an overview of the various elements of portfolio that particularly fit within the remit of the Family and Children's Services. I've given you a lengthy report. I'm hoping that you've gone through it, and I'll give you an overview in the meeting this morning. So just to provide you with that overview, it's really looking at the projects and the work in the inclusive economy portfolio. And the committee this morning is recommended to review the key themes and work streams in the IE portfolio and the progress that's been made to date. Review the plan for the joint school improvement strategy, which again sits within this portfolio. Consider the work of the Northumberland Officers Group, an internal project group who I'll talk about in a wee while. And then in addition, to identify any other areas for further scrutiny that you would like to bring forward. You'll note that this is relative to 3 areas of the corporate plan for Northumberland, which is the access to the things you need for connecting, realise your potential for learning, and attract more and better jobs and thriving within Northumberland. So the ambition of North of Tyne Combined Authority is really dynamic and it's really inclusive, and we're only going to look at one element of the North of Tyne portfolio today, which is the inclusive economy. And there are 4 key elements to the inclusive economy. Globally, this would be understood as inclusive growth. So it's not a unique term to the northeast of England in any way, shape or form. It is a global drive for change. And without any surprise, I guess, that what I would call the DNA of the inclusive economy approach is about closing gaps, narrowing gaps that exist. And you'll see as we go through that we really try to tackle areas that have the potential to get wider given we've had a global pandemic, but also the work that we do in the projects and investment that's made is about saying how can we help our residents, particularly in Northumberland, but clearly working collectively around North of Tyne. So the 4 key areas are looking at closing the gap on average earnings, increasing the earnings and qualification levels in particular, looking at progression routes. That's really, really important here, not just about doing some learning and moving on to a different job, but actually in work progression. So if you're currently employed, how do we help you to continue to learn, increase your skills, make you potentially more economically viable, which is a better future for your own family circumstances. We also look at closing the unemployment gap and removing barriers, closing skills and education gap, and that's not just through adult learning, that's also looking at schools. So it's really important that this isn't just seen as an adult skills portfolio. There is a transition between schools all the way through. And as this committee is particularly focused, you know that the work that's done in schools really demonstrates and leads to the outcomes we get in adult learning and adult futures and continued lifelong learning as we would know it today. And then the last element of closing the gap is around the aspiration and ambition gap, and ensuring that everyone has aspiration and confidence to be able to make really good choices, whether that's around career or whether it's training, development, etc. That's the DNA really of the North of Tyne inclusive economy. So first element I'm just going to pick up on is the Inclusive Economy Board, which meets quarterly. I don't know whether it's ironic or not, but actually its very first meeting was during the first week of lockdown. So the Inclusive Economy Board, with the 4 areas I've just talked about, first met, that was the initial launch in that first week of lockdown, and has continued to meet ever since, really focused around the impact and recovery of the economy post-COVID. And what does that mean? Where does the area of focus, finance, funding, support and projects need to be generated to be able to make sure that we're making that difference and contribute towards narrowing the gap I talked about earlier? So there is a lot of work within the Inclusive Economy Board, 2 key areas. So they look at an area of work stream for young people and also around industry and business and how they work with businesses to make a real difference and change some perceptions, but also drive and deliver new opportunities that businesses can really engage with education and fellow businesses across the whole area as well. One of the areas directly related to the Inclusive Economy Board that's been driven is the Good Work Pledge. And you'll note on page 5 of the report that I've put in 5 pillars of practice within the Good Work Pledge. There was a launch in November, and I was really pleased to see that one of the key employers who were showcased as part of that launch were a Northumberland employer. So clearly my role is focused to make sure that Northumberland's positioned well within the North of Tyne portfolio, and that we ensure that we're getting what we need as a Northumberland county, as well as that tripartite agreement between the 3 authorities with the North of Tyne, Newcastle and North Tyneside. So you'll see there are a number of businesses in that Good Work Pledge launch. The adult education budget, and at previous committees I've brought the annual reports to this committee for the adult learning section. Previously this was held centrally from DFE and the Education Skills Funding Agency. Across North of Tyne, this is it's worth about 22 million in terms of Northumberland, North Tyneside and Newcastle delivery of adult skills. That has now been devolved to the North of Tyne Combined Authority, and it has not made any difference in terms of income into Northumberland. So our income remains exactly the same, but actually it's a key priority area. And at the last committee, you asked me to talk a little bit more about skills and skills strategies, and I'll be doing that in the future. But the direct relationship here is ensuring that this money is invested to underpin the economic priorities for Northumberland or Newcastle or North Tyneside in each of their areas, which is why it's particularly important to ensure that we have all of the skills and the future skills identified and lined up, and they become our priorities to train and support our residents into, I guess, more and better jobs longer term. The Inclusive Economy Innovation Fund is a significant amount of money, £12 million put to one side, which is a co-investment fund. So it's on I think it's 3-to-1 ratio. So ideally we'd actually see some greater investment as a result of this. and it has been used really well so far. A number of areas that are asked to particularly focus on in terms of any of this investment project or investment ask. So again, residents who are out of employment, anyone who's really low wage earning, low skills, and young people who are NEET, so not in education, employment or training. So you can see the core theme. There isn't really a deviation from those 4 key priorities that I talked about to start with. So each of the strands and elements relate directly to that. There's a fairly innovative programme, Return to Work for Carers, and that has started. It hasn't perhaps got the traction we would have liked due to COVID, but it certainly has started with that work. Now for Northumberland, this is a big area of priority for us, and we're doing some additional work on top of this, which is about saying, so we have a significant amount of carers across the county. How can we fast track them into qualifications, which ultimately may lead them into the caring profession? So some great work going on there, and the Return to Work carers, as you will see, a number have already picked up across North of Tyne. And some great feedback there as well, actually. And that's the purpose, to be able to take this feedback and understand the difference that this additional monies coming into North of Tyne can make from each of our constituent authorities. On page 8, just talking about the North of Tyne Digital Inclusion Scheme. Again, an area of which we have benefited. So you will recall again in previous meets I've talked about not just the connectivity, but actually the devices this has supported for our children in schools, particularly year 6, but then for our adult education learners. And actually we continue to be able to supply them with kit coming out of this fund. So just in the last 2 weeks, we've received a significant delivery into County Hall, and our adult learners that will join us post Easter break, anybody who wants to continue to learn remotely will be able to access these devices, and we'll be able to recycle and reuse those moving forward. So that's been a real benefit throughout COVID. In addition to the DFE funds that have supported devices, the Computers for Businesses provide devices. There's been a number of projects, but the North of Tyne Digital Scheme was really good. And what was really a little different to the digital scheme here was we provided, although a relatively small number, we did provide iPads into care homes, which allowed families to remain connected, particularly throughout the time when visitors weren't allowed. We've moved on a phase, and there are some really innovative programs, but they were really crucial in terms of keeping that connectivity in the first phases. You'll note throughout that I've talked about we've stayed connected with young people. We've done some surveys with young people throughout the COVID period. So what do they want going forward? What do they see as priority? And that's hugely important to be able to drive the work plan for the future for North of Tyne. The inclusive economy needs to be able to bend and shape around that DNA that we started out with, but to be able to be responsive and recognise the changing needs of the cohort that we're trying to support. This is really, really important post-COVID. In COVID, I guess we would say. I wanted to just talk a little bit about joint school improvement strategy, and you'll note that I've got a number of areas saying what it is we're trying to improve, the particular elements around the education challenge. Councillor Daly, I think, is on the call and championed the education challenge from the outset, really. You will notice that the priorities that were identified within the education challenge are now embedded and nested within the joint school improvement strategy. And that's really to get some very early traction and to be able to take this forward. And I know Councillor Dodd's been heavily engaged in discussions moving forward around reshaping, connecting with the Department for Education, but also linking direct in with the officers at North of Tyne to ensure that we really get what we need out of both the education challenge, but school improvement strategy. I guess hot off the press, what I can report is just in the last 2 weeks, all of the senior officers from school improvements across the 3 authorities have already started that work and begun to get some real richness of programme development in there. So bringing the best from Newcastle, Northumberland and North Tyneside and really doing that cross-fertilisation and working together on this will really make the difference. It's not for me about saying let's do things in a cheaper way. It's actually using the depth and richness of what we want to achieve to be able to bring that together and get the best out of everybody. So Northumberland's particularly good at some areas, and actually both of the authorities have said, can we understand how you've done that, how you've achieved that? It's really good CPD, it's really best practice, and actually it's really good partnership working, and something that we'll definitely work on and enhance even further. So, you know, particularly around sharing our priorities, but also around raising standards. We have a number of areas that we have concerns about, particularly around recovery and moving forward around curriculum. And I know that's an area that we want to talk about moving forward into the June committee and onwards. You can see on page 12 that just that spider diagram of the elements of the joint school improvement strategy, and again, Councillor Dodd really pushing on this and working really hard to get the education challenge brought to fruition. Change is hard, and none of it's easy, none of it's straightforward, but that's still a direction that he's working really hard to achieve. In terms of some of the areas that we definitely feel will benefit Northumberland, this is an area for us that we feel strongly to be able to pull from North Tyneside and Newcastle and use that richness. It's really important that we consider across the whole of the piece, not just within our joint school improvement strategy, where things work really, really well and how we use that, not necessarily to replicate, but shape it to meet the needs of Northumberland. And so we bring together a group of officers across Northumberland who lead on particular aspects. That can be in education, it can be in employability, it can be in regeneration, planning, skills. We bring them together once a month. And actually that group of individuals, again, a really rich group sat in Northumberland who know the needs of Northumberland. That's the most important bit. They sit, they work out what the key aspects are. We look at some determinants, we look at some numbers, we look at some statistics, and they tell us and shape the direction in which we need to move. Now that group have pulled together, and I've suggested in here, it's almost like a project pipeline. So where are the hotspots for us in Northumberland? How do we bring that together? How do we say in these particular aspects, actually what will make the difference? What do we need to help us make change in that particular area? So we use those statistics to be able to determine that. There are a number of project areas that are in a pipeline. That sounds very industrial, and I don't mean it to be, because actually I'm talking about our residents, our children, families here, but actually where we look at indicators that tell us we need to make some changes and a difference, and we can be very pointed and very aspect focused rather than very broad. I think there are a number of areas that we've been particularly successful with, particularly the digital inclusion, and that will continue to roll forward, as you've seen in previous reports that I've brought to this committee. But also the work through that triage employability team. We stepped up that triage team as a result of COVID to be able to meet the needs of rapid change. Now, I still don't think we're at that point of significant rapid change, because furlough is still continuing. So at the point that furlough comes to fruition, or or ceases, shall we say, there is likely to be a greater spike at that point and a greater need for that triage. So in Northumberland, in some way, shape or form, we will continue to offer that triage facility to be able to rapidly support individuals who become, at a point of change in career opportunities, and actually can we help them move very quickly into something else. It's our job to be able to look at what the skills are in Northumberland, and currently, we've got a number of large employers, a number of projects on stock, that should anybody become unemployed pretty quickly, we can help retrain them and move them and get them ready to step into those roles. And that's really the essence of the Inclusive Economy Board. So just to conclude, you know, we've got a Closing the Gaps map. There's a little on page 14, I think it is. There's a Closing the Gaps model there that was used at North of Tyne in terms of the Cabinet report last year. And what we have done is model that across Northumberland. So we've used our statistics. This is the first model, and clearly, you know, we're comparing 2019 against 2018. So we're already a little out of date, but you will see exactly why this inclusive economy exists, because for Northumberland, you will see that all of our rates are above the North of Tyne, in fact, and in some areas above England rate. It just shows the level of challenge that we have in Northumberland, the breadth and size of county, and how we need to be able to drive and determine what the skills needs are across the county, but also ensure that our projects are particularly focused to meet the needs and challenges. So if we look at the proportion of residents with no qualifications, actually our numbers increased from 2018 to 2019. So that tells you immediately that actually perhaps we hadn't got right our strategy around the skills offer that we had. Did that target the right areas? Did we have enough engagement? And were we offering the right qualifications to be able to move everybody into employment? So clearly we'll start to look at 2020 later this year, and we'll hopefully start to see a difference. We'll have to manage this with the COVID eye as well, and understand that actually our numbers potentially will rise. There are less jobs out there. However, there are as many, if not more, training opportunities and learning opportunities. So the key task for us will be to ensure that we don't increase our unemployment rate, but do meet the needs more locally of any education and skills priorities that we can. So probably the largest piece of work and the most important to continue is ensuring that that officers group remains focused within the inclusive economy portfolio, is really dynamic and responsive to be able to shift what needs to be done and meet the needs when our statistics arise or we see a change at any point. But we will certainly revisit this model annually for the next few years to be able to drive forward and see the difference that this will make across Northumberland. So just in conclusion, a really broad portfolio. It has resonance with the global inclusive growth approach. It is tailored to North of Tyne, and our job in Northumberland is to ensure that this meets the needs of Northumberland. So the most important bit is the voices of individual officers in various groups to ensure that Northumberland is represented in each of these aspects at North of Tyne. And I would be confident to say that our officers ensure that we have a very fair and balanced representation, and we make sure that the needs are met across the county. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Audrey. Councillor Dodd, do you wish to add anything to that?
Sorry, I'm just getting unmuted. Yeah, that's very comprehensive report from Audrey. I did pick this portfolio up in September, and I've taken advice at every step from Councillor Daly, who, as you know, has been and may be our education guru. COVID has really put us into Groundhog Day, but that doesn't mean to say that things have stopped and that the ambition has gone down. The ambition for the Northeast is still what I would say the education challenge, which has made a difference in other areas, Manchester, London. So we need to try and replicate that model. So the ask is still there from government, because it was a promise when we went into this North of Tyne authority. So that is, for me, the number one. But you know, we're talking about let's get out of this COVID hole we're in. And I don't think we're there yet. We just need to look over that channel and see Germany and Italy and France. I think they're all going into a new lockdown. So we're not quite there. So I think keep up all this good work. It will make a difference in all. You can see it's a huge report with a lot of good things in it that may make a massive difference. We just need this clear water of getting out of COVID and getting everybody back to school and everybody back into some sort of normality. But that's still a little way off. But I'll take any questions if I can help. Or thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Councillor Dodd. Mr. Hodgson, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I read the section on the joint school improvement strategy with interest, and there's a few questions I'd just like to put either to Richard or Audrey, just to clarify things. I noticed there's not a time scale. I'll go on to the other questions so you can put them all together, which surprised me to a certain extent, because within the text, it identified that 1/3 of secondary schools are either required improvement or inadequate by Ofsted status. Now, that's thousands of students. And given the length of time we've been focusing on that and have made very, very slow progress, what is it about this challenge that's suddenly going to make a significant difference? So what is the timescale on that? Also as well, has there been a cost analysis against those priorities? Because obviously those priorities will vary from school to school. Some might take on a greater need in Northumberland or greater need in certain areas of Northumberland than others. So has there been a cost analysis against that? And thirdly, our social workers, the focus on that and the reports that we've had have been very, very successful in their in-house training. And Councillor Daly, I know, has identified that as a key priority last 2-3 years, and it's paid dividends. The staff retention, the job satisfaction, so on. Now, we've identified that we struggle to have maths, physics and computing teachers. Is there something that we could take from the best practice of the social worker training and the setup there and say, well, look, could we do something similar that will help us to attract those sort of teachers, those skills, train them, and then retain them within the schools in Northumberland or / North Tyne? So they're the three real areas that I'm looking at there.
Thank you, Alan. Chair, would you like me to come back and respond to those?
Yes, please.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. Thanks for that, Alan. You're absolutely right around timescale. So we have a lead officer, a strategic lead at North Tyne, who does all of the development work with 3 directors across 3 constituent authorities. We've had a number of timescales, and that is why the 3 directors have come together to really accelerate and move that forward much more quickly. So we have now put in a 12-month calendar of work that we want to achieve as a team. And that's a first phase towards it, and it nests within the education improvement agenda and school improvement strategy that I've talked about today. So we'd like to see some change. If I just move into one of them that you talked about, that challenge around the schools. So the bigger challenge that I've currently got, and you're absolutely spot on, because if I just then take, because this is about North of Tyne, if I then take out Northumberland, so our biggest challenge in Northumberland are our secondary school performances. Our first and primary school performances have significantly improved. Yeah. But actually at the moment, we're really hampered, Alan, because actually the school inspection framework, we're a full year without being able to change any judgments at this moment in time. And I think the important thing to say is that doesn't mean to say we're not doing anything. We are working very hard and have made significant improvement across the year, we believe. But what we need to get is that Ofsted inspection to be able to provide the difference in the judgment. We've just had 11 short, not short, but very brief inspections from Ofsted, but very focused. And all of those schools that were inspected, they were either joint, twice requires improvement, or inadequate schools had to be inspected. And all 11 of those schools were deemed to be taking effective action.
All right, good.
So that's been really good. But actually, the school improvement partners and the work that they do is really crucial in our county here. And that work has continued. There is a termly report provided by the school improvement partners. So it might be, you know, I'm not determining the agenda, but it might be really helpful to get a school improvement update report that gives you that meat on the bones, that just gives you assurance that work is continuing. And with that, we'll be able to give that a Northumberland flavour entirely.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's the first one. Yes, in terms of the cost analysis, it is at a very high level, Alan, I have to say. And that's because at the moment, the education challenge was planned around 10 million a year for 10 years. So it's a very high level cost exercise that's gone on at the moment. We were confident that within that 10 million per year, we could make significant differences. And I would say that it wasn't, if there are 5 priorities, it wasn't 2 million just across the board on 5 priorities. No. We definitely moved the balance, if you like, or the proportion of that funding to be able to reflect where we felt we needed greater impact. And so that was really important to do. And then I'm absolutely with you on the social workers, and there is a strand in terms of the education joint school improvement and also education challenge, which is about leadership, retention and recruitment. Now, the leadership for me isn't just about the school leaders. Leaders are at every single level. So that's the curriculum leader, a subject leader, a year group leader. And within that, within the model overall, so we've got some recruitment and retention bonuses. So Councillor Daly, I know he's put his hand up, may want to come in on this because it was an area that he determined, which was following, I think, a model determined by one of the armed forces, the Navy, where actually if you came and joined, for example, and you stayed in Northumberland 5 years, the funds from the challenge would remove your university debt.
Right.
And that's a really good incentive.
Yes,
now,
it is.
Now, we won't be able to organise that until we've got the funds. That doesn't mean to say that we're just sitting waiting to say how we're going to, you know, we'll just wait until that money comes along. That is a key focus, and we've talked particularly about where we have, let's use Northumberland as the example, a rural school with a single subject teacher who then becomes potentially quite isolated. So what we've done is, you know, it's not rocket science, but we've connected up and begun that kind of subject network where colleagues can work together, feel more confident, can share and assess. You know, moving forward in this summer term where standardised assessment of GCSE grades in-house will need to be proven. They'll be open for challenge and appeals. So actually where we've built that network, it means that we're able to help colleagues feel more assured and confident, and we are much more consistent across the county in terms of that assessment profile. But recruitment and retention is a key aspect and a key focus. We can't afford, we can't run our schools without having that workforce to be able to develop. And there are a number of areas that we are developing in-house as a team in Northumberland. So Nicola Taylor, who's on the call today, is developing a Dare to Lead programme. We are working with head teachers around a health and wellbeing programme that has a number of CPD aspects to it. These are all wraparound CPD offers that really make our head teachers, we hope, feel really valued. It's a good place to work. It's a good place to stay. And actually, we want to be able to look at succession planning. So that Dare to Lead programme is really innovative and really different. It's quite... it can push people outside their comfort zone. It makes them deal with things that perhaps they haven't dealt with before. but actually we've all just been through a brilliant example of things we've never dealt with before. So I've done scenarios around a flu pandemic, but I've never been involved and lived and worked through a global pandemic. So actually, the resilience that our staff have shown, some of it's as a result of training, some of that will be much better as a result of wider training that we're putting in. So I'm completely with you around developing new models. So rest assured, it is embedded within the Joint School Improvement Strategy and Education Challenge. And we do have a number of areas in Northumberland that we are focusing on for our head teachers and the teacher workforce, and we'll continue to develop that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that, Audrey. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Chair. What I just wanted to remind people on that, by the way, I think this is a really good report this morning that we've got, which gives a lot of overview. The context for this, if we can remember life before COVID, is that particularly in the north of Tyne, there was an education deficit before. On average, if you were a pupil in Northumberland, you were outperformed by your equivalent in even some of the most disadvantaged places in London, on average between 1 and 2 grades higher in London than an equivalent in the north of Tyne and Northumberland area. So there was already a huge amount of challenges that needed to be addressed, and that's well documented within the Northern Powerhouse Report 2018, with the LEP report in 2013 and subsequently 2017, 2018 as well, all absolutely very clearly saying that something needed to be done in order to address that grade deficit, because it's not just a statistical thing where, you know, you're 1 or 2 grades behind as a young person. It's the impact that that has on your employment prospects, your prospects if you want to go into further education, your employability, and your eventual earning opportunities as you go through life. So it was never just about chasing grades or keeping Ofsted happy. It was about actually the life chances and also building a really vibrant economy in north of Tyne, where we can actually put young people into those emerging job sectors of the future. So that was the context. And now with COVID, it quite frankly has turbocharged the need to do this, because we've all seen the impact of homeschooling. Many parents, you know, very challenged about how they work with their children at home, and already evidence is showing that, you know, particularly in primary, some young people are going to be between 1 year to 2 years behind. And it's, again, not just the educational element, it's also the whole socialization as well. So on the point of the education challenge, which I will remind everybody is written into the parliamentary statute. And when I was at because I used to be on the Combined Authority Cabinet leading on this, is that it was very clear that it was written in that statute. And we should, as a committee, as a council, cross-party, be pushing the government to make sure that this happens. So there was just a couple of things I just wanted to touch on. One, I can probably say this these days, but I think education's far too centralised. It's far too centralised in London. What COVID has demonstrated is the likes of Audrey, Dean, Kath McAvoy, the whole of the team within Children's Services stepped up to the plate within hours of the government saying lockdown March 23rd, 2020. Within hours, they had teams out, they had cordons put up, they were able to supply PPE, you name it, they did it. That to me proves that we have flexibility within our local system to be able to not just cope with a crisis, but actually cope with how we address education going forward. So I think there is something about perhaps the DfE releasing some of those levers of power and actually trusting. And where that has happened, there's been impact. London, one example, education challenge, a long-term program which has resulted in kids in London being miles better educationally than kids in our area. That's it in a nutshell. Manchester got 50 million quid through the post going, here, can you do something with that? Because they trusted them. So why can't North of Tyne have that as well? And that's something we really should be pushing on. I like the references in this to, you know, not just looking at education, but looking at the whole skills agenda, looking at that whole inclusive economy board. I do think there is something that we need, and I know Councillor Dodd's on the call, so I think this is something maybe you need to be thinking about going forward, and whoever is on the combined authority going forward after the elections. But seriously, I think we can do some really radical things as a result of COVID. And one of them is we have an education system based on an agricultural society from the 18th century, where you have 6 weeks holiday during the summer. Why on earth can't we just be a little bit more radical, keep those 13 weeks holidays that teachers have, not taking any of them away, but just revamp our terms, go to 4 terms a year, maybe take the 6 weeks summer down to 4 weeks. Why? Well, already children who were taking 6 weeks holiday from some of our most disadvantaged communities were already encountering grade deficit when they went back to school. I used to work in schools. The teachers would say to you, most of the first term going back in September was spent trying to bring the kids up to where they were in July when they left. So by reducing the summer holiday period to a shorter period and putting those extra weeks elsewhere in the year, it actually also helps teacher workload as well. And I think that's something we should be thinking about, basing our education system on a digitized economy, not on picking potatoes like we were in the 18th century. I think that's one big thing. And the other element, and I know we're touching on mental health later on in a report, but this is not just about keeping Ofsted happy and getting education grades. This is about our teacher retention. And Audrey's absolutely right. One of the things which I wrote into the original draft, and by the way, this was consulted with hundreds of leaders across North of Tyne. I was involved in every one of those meetings where I was presenting to them. What I can say to you is that taking the Royal Navy model, which is if you sign up to a certain amount of time, then at the end of that, there is an opportunity to have your student loan paid off. What a fantastic incentive to come to North of Tyne, then to know that one, you're going to get fantastic CPD, fantastic support, fantastic leadership opportunities and career progression, but also you can actually come here and you can actually have part of your student loan or all of your student loan repaid, because you have made a commitment to education within North of Tyne. And we've got so much that we have in our area. We've got place, we've got the coast, we've got cities, you name it. There is no reason not to like the North of Tyne, and particularly Northumberland. Of course, I would say that. But I think if you put all of those things in the mix, North of Tyne, our area, and Northumberland could be an incredible place for people to come and develop their careers. And why on earth shouldn't we be trying to get teachers from inner city schools in London, which are outstanding, and get them rocking up to Northumberland to work here, actually getting a better quality of life, better housing, better environment, better people to mix with? Why wouldn't we? So I think there's lots in this report which I welcome. I think the impact of COVID has accelerated the need for it. We definitely, I think, should be really pushing in order to get an education challenge signed off with the funding. And Chair, I don't know if this is something you would consider, but you know what? I think it'd be really good if this committee cross-party were to write to both the North of Tyne Combined Authority, but also to the Education Secretary to say that we want the education challenge, because if it's good enough for London and it's good enough for Manchester, it's damn well good enough for North of Tyne and Northumberland. So commend the report.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. Do we have any more questions? Anyone else like to raise a comment? Mr. Lennox?
Sorry, I'm just unmuting here. Yeah, in the light of what we've said so far, particularly paragraph 10.5, which I think was referred to and indirectly by Alan Hodgson, my main concern and amongst that is this notable gap in physics, maths and computing specialists. Now, historically, Northumberland has had a tremendous record in terms of particularly maths. In my day as the Northumberland High School head of Department of Maths, we were known nationally for the work that we were doing at that particular time. We were developing. And bearing in mind, this area has historically always been a good teacher producing area. We've supplied the rest of the country in many ways with teaching skills and teachers, etc. And one of the key aspects years ago, which seems to have been lost a lot in recent years, is the importance of having a good network of subject teachers. There was an excellent network of maths teachers, secondary school maths teachers in Northumberland, and as a result of that, there was a lot of good internal to the Northumberland Authority in-service training, helping each other, supporting each other, building up the level of skills, getting the right kind of people to teach maths in the best way, because it's a vicious circle. In a sense, if we don't get the right quality of teaching, we don't get the right students coming through, we don't produce the right number of teachers, etc. And I would like to see some real support again for the teachers in our area. And I'm a bit biased, obviously, on maths, to see better development, local development, good networks, enabling. And North of Tyne should provide us with a bigger forum for that. In order to do it and get back to the days when, you know, Northumberland was a leading light in terms of the production of good maths teachers.
Thank you, Mr. Lennox. Audrey, did you want to come in there?
Yes, just to respond to say, actually, that's a real strand of the joint working that we will take forward. Reinvigorating those networks, it's hugely important. And actually, we know we've got a real challenge around physics, maths and computing, but actually this for Northumberland, we have a leading project that we're working around STEM. And actually, what does that mean for Northumberland? How do we get more teachers engaged in this project across the county? How do we get more industry linked in with our schools? And more importantly, how do we get more children to see that they've got a future career? I'll say maths first because that's your favourite area, but maths, physics, science and engineering more broadly as well, so that we bring all of those ST, E and M's through in terms of that work. So I think you'd be pleased with what you'll start to see in the future, which is a greater focus on these areas.
Thank you, Audrey. Kath, did you want to come back on that?
Not particularly about that, although I would just reiterate the fact that because there are lots of exciting opportunities for us moving forward in relation to some of the skill development, which I'm hoping will then attract the right teaching and academics to the region to be able to support those agendas going forward. So as we develop the post-16 curriculum and the post-16 skills agenda, I'm hopeful that that will attract other people to the area. I just didn't want to lose sight of the bit about the education challenge and what Wayne was saying about contacting the government. I think certainly within Northumberland and you know, I can speak for Northumberland, but also north of the Tyne, we haven't lost sight of the fact that that money has not come our way, and we need to make sure that we continue to lobby in order to get to see where that funding is. We've not had a formal no, so we just need to keep lobbying to make sure that we can keep that agenda alive. So I just wanted to reassure you that that's what we will be doing, and conversations are going on with the North of the Tyne lead on education in order to make sure that that voice continues to be heard.
Thank you for that, Kath. And with regards to what Councillor Daly said, you know, from a Northumberland point of view, we can raise that, and maybe if Councillor Dodd can raise that on the North of Tyne as well, so that we have a, I'm going to say, a two-pronged approach to see if that can be moved forward. That would be, you know, appreciated. And with regards to something that Audrey said earlier on about bringing more reports forward from this committee to give a more Northumberland view, I think that would be appreciated as well, so we know what we're doing from this side. Do we have any more questions or opinions on that item? Okay, so the recommendation is review the key themes and work streams in the inclusive economy portfolio and the progress to date. Review the plan for the joint school improvement strategy. Consider the work of the Northumberland Officers Group developing projects for submission to meet the needs of Northumberland, and identify any areas for further scrutiny. We all okay with those? All agreed? Thank you. Okay, we moved on to the next item, which is mental health support in schools. And I'm going to pass you over to Nicola Taylor in the first instance for that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to endeavour to share my screen. I'm not so skilled in this in Zoom, so you'll just have to bear with me for a moment if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, is that visible to everyone? Yeah. Okay, so as the Chair introduced me, my name's Nicola Taylor and I'm the Head of Inclusive Education Services at NCC, sitting within Education and Skills. Also in the meeting this morning is my colleague Helen, who has a joint commission post across the CCG and NCC and is the Children and Young Persons Operational Commissioning Manager for the CCG. You have received a full report already with the papers, and the recommendations for the report are that the committee notes the contents of the report and recognises the support on offer to staff and students in Northumberland schools, identifying potential issues for further consideration if appropriate. We're going to run a short presentation, around 10 minutes, and then Helen and I will obviously stay to answer any questions that members have. The first premise that I want to say, really picking up on what's been said already this morning around our young people and in relation to the North of Tyne inclusive economy, really all of this work is underpinned by this absolute belief that if our young people are to be happy and successful and participate fully in adult lives, they need to feel a sense of belonging, care, and have really good emotional health. So presentation this morning is actually in a slightly different structure to the report, because for the purposes of today, I felt it was helpful to summarise the content within the model that's articulated and presented to schools and the wider community, which is the graduated approach to mental health. This follows the nationally recognised and widely used Thrive model. In Northumberland, the graduated approach is a term widely understood by schools in relation to SEND. And it was a conscious decision by all partners in 2017 to mirror this language in relation to mental health. The approach is explained very carefully and clearly in the BU website, which you've got the link there at the bottom of this slide, which was launched in January 2021. It's centred around the principle that children and young people can be expected and supported to thrive, and most will, but individuals at different points in their lives may need help to cope, and this help will need to be delivered at different intensities. Our services are aligned within the different sections of this model. Joined up approaches have been embedded in Northumberland for the past 3 years, and work has been undertaken collaboratively across all partners as we've moved through the local transformation plan, monitored through the Health and Wellbeing Board. This has been focused on 3 aspects. In 2018, the government green paper Transforming Children and Young People's Mental Health presented an opportunity to enhance the rate of change via the offer of funding accessed through bids for pilot projects. Northumberland was successful in first wave bids, one of a very small number of CCGs. The feedback at the time indicated this was partly in recognition of the pre-existing very close working relationships. And it's been consistently reported nationally since that time that we work very well as a system. That has led, in part, we believe, to being successful in Wave 3 bids. The bids have secured the provision of mental health support teams around the school partnerships of Hexham and Blythe, with Ashington and Bedlington being set up currently, and also have resourced to reduce waiting times for higher tier services to 4 weeks. The pandemic, of course, has brought additional many layers of complexity, which have led to enhanced activity across the system. Some additional resource has been added, and there's been some reallocation of resources alongside the inevitable changes in the way that services have been delivered. It's been very important to develop strength at every level so that children, young people and staff in schools, importantly, can thrive, cope and access the right help at the right time. Good whole school approaches underpin everything and are the bedrock of the Thrive model. Never has this been more important as schools have been in a state of flux over the past 12 months. Schools that have a focus on well-being are in the best position to have thriving children, young people and staff, and to be aware of the early signs of things going wrong and how to intervene early. This has been a focus of work in Northumberland over several years. There are various aspects to that which I'll go through now. So firstly, the government green paper referred to previously stated the requirement that all schools should have a senior mental health lead and must adopt a set of principles to ensure a strong whole school approach. A joint output across education, health and social care has been an offer of support and training to senior mental health leads over the past 3 years, including conferences and a co-produced good practice guide with associated audit tool. We've been developing a community of practice amongst our senior mental health leads across the county, assisted since March 2020 by the appointment of a county-wide coordinator, a member of staff seconded from one of our high schools. This post was created within the bid for Wave 1 Trailblazer funding and is being cited nationally by NHS England as best practice. This member of staff has been working on a full-time basis for a year and has set up an online learning community for our senior mental health leads, Hive. Secondly, within the mental health support team offer in Trailblazer areas, schools are able to access training packages for staff which support the development of resilience in children and young people of different ages. Such programmes, Friends and RAW, have been delivered in those Trailblazer areas, but the funding is available now for schools across the county to receive those training offers due to the addition of some public health funding. And those training offers have continued through the pandemic period in a virtual way. Thirdly, in September, as schools returned, the Wellbeing for Education Return programme was announced. This brought a grant for us in Northumberland and across the country for local authorities and CCGs to develop local arrangements for the delivery of a specific training package into schools and settings to improve well-being and mental health support in recognition of the impact of the pandemic and the disruption experienced by children, young people and staff. Our dedicated team has been working September through March on delivery of this project, which relies on a train-the-trainer approach. There have been a range of virtual offers available and all schools and settings have easy and ready access to the resources. 55% of our schools and settings so far report that they've delivered the training accordingly. And the promotion and support of this continues to be a focus priority for the workforce, our workforce visiting schools in coming months. Additionally, for schools, in Appendix 1 of the full report, you'll find a list of the extensive online resources produced by our services over the past year relating to mental health and wellbeing. Many of these include those that can be shared and provided for children, young people and families. Finally, in terms of whole school approaches, the mental health support teams, although working specifically around Hexham and Blythe schools up to now, have extended their reach since January 21. The new workforce of education mental health practitioners, of whom there are currently 5, have been offering advice to schools across the county on wellbeing audits, psychoeducation packages, school-based lesson plans around emotional health and wellbeing, and signposting to suitable resources for prevention and early intervention work. So in summary, ongoing work on whole school approaches has really picked up a pace and support has responded to current unprecedented need. Of course, additional to the bedrock of support for thriving and coping, timely access to services for individual children and young people is crucial. The first thing I'd like to discuss is COOTH. So in July 2020, COOTH was commissioned. It was already under consideration, but the decision was projected forward in response to the pandemic. COOTH, as you'll read in your report, is a digital online early intervention platform which is very easy to access and has a wide reach. It's proved to be well used already. Children and young people self-refer and can access dynamic content, forums and online counselling from trained professionals. Crucially, the system links to our local services, so when and if necessary, COOTH professionals can make onward referrals into our teams. Secondly, in 2018, schools told us that they wanted clear, transparent information about services and thresholds. And as a result of that, together with consistent concerns raised by children, young people and families, The BU website was finally launched in January 21. The precursor to this has been lengthy work between individual service providers such as school health, primary mental health workers, SIPs, and the Northumberland Inclusive Education teams to review together the threshold criteria to really ensure dovetailing. There are now systems in place for further discussions around step up and step down cross-service referrals. This is not yet perfect, but more understanding and collaboration between the services is leading to less bounce, something that we know causes and has caused intense frustration and high levels of stress for children and young people and their families. Thirdly, related to this and referrals into services, the Early Intervention Hub in Northumberland has been in operation throughout the pandemic and serves as a single point of referral for anyone who's concerned about a child or young person. Outputs from the hub may be onward referrals to mental health services, or education-based services, or support from social care early help teams. Additional training over the past year for early help triage staff has added clarity to onward referrals, again with the aim of reducing bounce. The Early Help Hub is an ideal route for referrers who are unclear which service might be appropriate and where a multi-agency response might be needed. An important development has been recently that direct referrals are now possible and permanently available from schools and parents into some of our specialist services, with consultation lines for primary mental health workers and SIPs, meaning that schools and families are able to seek advice over the phone in the first instance. The virtual school continues to offer support around mental health and wellbeing for individuals within the children looked after and education other than at school cohorts. Their offer has actually been strengthened through support from the mental health support teams so that signposting is more easily available to staff when required. In terms of our Northumberland Inclusive Education Services, schools can continue to refer to educational psychology, which is available on a traded basis via SLAs, and also to the emotional wellbeing and behaviour support team, who are now free at the point of delivery since September 2020. Of great significance and to support specifically the pandemic situation, the pop-up hub was established in anticipation of the return to school in September 2020, recognising the increased levels of anxiety that might be felt by some youngsters and their families in returning to school. The hub ran through the autumn term, accepting referrals for individual children and young people who were struggling to return for COVID-related reasons. 91 cases were referred, with action taken by early help family workers, education welfare team, the emotional wellbeing behaviour team, educational psychology, school health, SIPs, all following multi-agency discussions. All pieces of work around individual children and young people were undertaken in partnership with families and schools with the aim of supporting attendance. Average attendance of that cohort did in fact increase, with 43 youngsters reaching in excess of 75% attendance, many from a starting point of 0 at the beginning of term. If we turn now to consider support for school staff, the first thing is the commissioning of Quell, which took place in September 2020, with similar expected benefits to Cooth. Again, the service uptake has slowly increased and is being monitored on a quarterly basis. I think the Quell organisation, the master organisation, always expect Quell to be a bit slower off the ground than Cooth because of a general reticence, or more of a reticence of adults to engage in online platforms. Secondly, over the past 6 months, an online resource created within Education and Skills at the Council and contributed to by staff has been assembled, and at the request of head teachers shared with them to pass on to staff. Heads were reporting that they were concerned about levels of anxiety and stress within their teams and were feeling the burden of needing to signpost without an understanding of what necessarily was a high quality and/or useful resource. This was a response to that expression of concern. It's a Padlet of resources which directs people to self-help and various forums. Thirdly, in autumn 2020, a head teacher survey was undertaken to help us to understand what might be causing the most concern in schools. And as a result, we set up a head teacher wellbeing working group facilitated by our officers. The group has met 3 times since January, and actions have been set in motion, including the offer of sessions in the summer term based on strong relationships, resilience, vulnerability and leadership, and values. This work is ongoing, and as Audrey referred to earlier, we're hoping to run the Dare to Lead programme for head teachers from September. Fourthly, staff are all reminded that there are usual ways for referral to mental health services via their primary care GP networks. Additionally, since the beginning of the year, a multi-agency group has been meeting weekly to analyse returns from SENCOs in schools relating to education and health care plan learners and following up with required actions. These are some of our most vulnerable learners. In addition, we've had ongoing tracking of the 91 learners from the pop-up hub to check in and see how they're doing in terms of attendance this term. Where attendance hadn't improved in January, they've been monitored and reviewed consistently, and any remaining where attendance is an issue have strong plans in place with families and schools. Thirdly, we're meeting weekly and have done since March the 8th, planned again into this summer term to review the need for the pop-up hub to be reinstated. Indications so far is that actions actually should be focused on support for schools around whole school approaches, rather than at this point in time, additionality being needed in terms of specific services. Therefore, on the first day back in the summer, there will be a clear bulletin issued to schools to remind them about all the resources available to them, the teams available, and the referral routes into more specialist services. So in conclusion, just after 3 weeks back at school, how is it looking? Attendance overall reported by our Education, Welfare and Attendance Service is better than anticipated. We have some schools reporting anxiety-related absence, but they're taking a lenient approach, working with families to try and support them to get their youngsters in. Where that is the case, it's largely around families where they have members shielding. So understandably are feeling cautious. Our alternative providers are settled overall. We do see a slight increase and slow increase into referrals into the primary mental health work team, with numbers using consultation line up, and referrals to emotional wellbeing and behaviour team are up. All of these things are being closely monitored. We intend to hold a head teacher focus group session in May to seek stakeholder views on the landscape as it relates to mental health, to work out whether we need to take further action in a different direction. And I think what we know from our experience so far is that we are able to create rapid responses to unmet need if required. That's the end of the presentation. So if anyone has any questions or comments, Helen and I will do our best to answer.
Thank you for that, Nicola. Helen, did you want to add anything, or are you there for questions?
No, I'm more than happy with the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Guy?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thank you for that presentation. It was a very thorough presentation, so I don't think I need to go through the report again. But just a few things to pick up. I mean, it's obvious from the report that mental health issues have been the priority for the administration in the long and short term. And I think the key figure for me in that report is the waiting times. You know, 3 years ago, people were waiting 30 weeks to be seen, and now 91% are being seen within 3 weeks, which just shows how much work has gone on within the last 3 years. I'd also like to highlight the early help hub. The quicker you can catch these issues, the easier they are to deal with. Yeah. You know, if they get left for too long, it gets worse and worse for the individual, and it becomes harder to pull it back. So the approach that the council are taking in this is absolutely spot on. It's one that should be shared regionally and nationally. I think it's something that the council as a council we can be proud of. And the second part of the report on the COVID, again, it's all there. What I was very pleased with was the quickness of response, as was alluded to earlier. I mean, as soon as it transpired that COVID was going to have issues on the mental health of our staff and pupils, the team jumped into action, and we had that online presence in place very quickly, very quickly. Yeah, open to questions from members of the committee, but I'm very happy with the report as it is.
Thank you, Guy. Just mentioning that change in the times, I think, you know, it's a significant improvement and very welcome to see that reduced down to 3 weeks from what it was. You know, I think it's very welcome indeed. Anyone have any questions? Anything you'd like to ask based on that report? Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Chair. Again, a really good report. There's a couple of questions which I had on it. First of all, can I just say on the report, I really welcome the fact that mental health support for our teaching staff is incorporated, because that goes back to the previous discussion we had on the education challenge. That is really good. A couple of things I would like to see. I know that you said there's some stuff going out to schools for the beginning of the new term. I know a lot of schools do have a governor lead on mental health. I'd like to see that across every single school, an expectation that there is a governor who has specific responsibility for identification of both staff, support staff, but also student well-being, and that it should be sitting on a governor agenda at every single meeting in the same way that safeguarding is. So, and that's a little bit of a system improvement, but I actually think that says something about how we plan to drive this forward. Couple of other things as well, and apologies, I might have not picked up the nuance on this, but I'll ask it anyway. Early identification is crucial, but early identification can also happen very early through nursery settings and preschool, and that includes private settings. So I'm curious as to what we may be considering in terms of that early identification of behavioural patterns in preschool, and particularly with our private settings, because there are a lot of them. What are we doing to support them? And also as well, there is something definitely around how we support parents, because obviously loads of parents now have actually realized that teachers don't have an easy job, because they having to sit at home doing what the teachers do and probably thinking, my God, I want the schools open. Hallelujah. So what are we doing around supporting parents? Because I do know that Action for Children have something called Parent Talk, which is an online support mechanism. And they've had nearly 500,000 parents contact them on this online hub. So is there something around that? So the early identification, and what are we doing for parents, and obviously that thing around governors as well.
Thank you, Wayne.
Chair, would you like me to start with the answer for those 2 points?
Yes,
okay.
please.
Thanks. As far as early identification goes, we've done a lot of work with how we kind of interact with our early help family teams. So what we're looking to do, and obviously COVID's put a bit of a hold on this, but moving forward, what we're looking to do is to incorporate our primary mental health work teams within the early help family centres, so that they can do a lot of kind of co-work together. So that will be working with parents who access the centres there with their young children, obviously preschool and very early days, to look at some of the group work they can do together, and doing some joint individual work with some of the families as well. So that's something that we're very much keen to kind of drive forward. Like I say, obviously with COVID happening, we haven't been able to like physically get into the buildings yet, but actually has been a lot of work in the background. And we've done a lot of work around planning and what that will look like, so that when we can get into the buildings and we can base staff there, that we can kind of drive that forward quite quickly. As far as private settings go, that's something at the moment, I will be honest, we haven't, driven that forward yet. We want to start with the early help family centres, but absolutely that's on our radar as well, and will be something we'll look to kind of do as a stepped approach. As far as support for parents and carers, the BU website, which I know Nicola mentioned, that's got 3 portals on it, and one of the portals there is for parent and carers. So a parent and carer can go onto that portal, and it's got lots of kind of information, self-help information there for them to be able to access and use. On top of that, as part of the Trailblazer funding, we provided some money to Cygnus, a third sector organisation, who are developing parent and carer kind of group work support groups. the parents, and again, they started that before COVID. There's been a little bit of a halt on that because of COVID, although they have done some stuff digitally. But moving forward, again, they're going to pick that up at pace, and they've been doing quite a lot of consultation work with parent and carers about what they want and what they want the group work to look like moving forward.
Okay, thanks for that, Helen. Are you okay with that, Wayne?
Yes, Chair, just as I said, not to lose sight of the role of governance in this as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
could I add something
Yes.
there?
Go ahead.
Within education and skills, obviously we have the governance support team sitting. So I think it's a really good point, Wayne. Actually, we have been doing more and more work with our SEN designated governors, but I think it's something that we could definitely push forward. So that's a good point. In terms, if I could just pick up on another point there around early identification in preschools and early years settings. Obviously, our early years team are quite active across the piece in terms of the landscape of early years settings. So I think working with them around the general premise of early identification is pushed all the time. You know, it's part of their living and breathing and the work they do with settings. So I think that our services are responsive to queries that come to us from settings and providers across the piece. But as Helen says, I think that the commissioned work, we might need to look a bit further at that as we move forward. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Do we have any more questions or comments with regards to this item? One thing that I just wanted to ask is, as a member myself, I've seen a significant number of concerns raised by members of the public around mental health support for children. I'm conscious that this report, or the minutes of this report, would hit full council at some point in the future, and I know this report itself will be on the agenda, which is online. I would think it's very important for members, all council members, to see the content of this, and in the appendix as well, the links, so they understand and can respond themselves to any queries and questions they might get raised from members of the public around this subject. So I don't know whether it's possible to either share this report directly with council members, with elected members, or would you prefer any queries from members to come to a specific contact? I'm not sure which is best, which is preferred, or which is easiest. Kath?
I think we did send out a briefing to elected members with a long list of all of the mental health support services that were available. I wonder if we should just cross-reference the two of those and send those out rather than a briefing, rather than a full report. If we can just send out a briefing note, then that, or update the briefing note, that might be useful. I'll see if I can get a hold of a copy of that.
If you can, please.
Yeah.
Just with all the, the links that are on here, the tools that are available, sort of bringing it up to date. It is, I think it's been mentioned, a very sort of hot topic at the moment with everything that's gone on with COVID, concerns over returning to school, lack, missed education, etc., and what support is available. So I think, that bit of a refresh out to members would be, very, very welcome and beneficial if that's possible.
I'll get that. I'll get that sorted.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the recommendations on that is to note the contents of the report, recognise the support on offer to staff and students in Northumberland schools, and identify any potential issues for further consideration if appropriate. Are we all okay with those recommendations? We all agree? Thank you. So thank you, Helen and Nicola, for that report.
Thank you.
So moving on, item 6 is the work programme and monitoring report. Chris?
Yeah, again, like the forward plan, at this point, the work programme is just for members to note.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. So we have no urgent business, but I think Councillor Guy Renner-Thompson just wanted to mention something about the return back to school.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, also, this is, I think, our last facts meeting before the election. So just wanted to say how great it's been to be with everyone for the last 4 years, and we'll see who's here after then. But in terms of the school return, just to praise the staff, all the staff of the schools and the council, and say how well it's gone. We've been back for 3 weeks or so now. as a member and as the portfolio holder, I've had very little, well, I've had no correspondence or complaints from schools. The feedback we have is good. They're just getting on with it, and they've prepped hard over the holidays to get to this point. It hasn't just happened by itself. So I think we should note that and say well done to everyone, because this had the potential to not go this well, and it is going well. So I think that should be noted.
Okay, thank you, Guy. Wayne, did you have your hand up, or is that an old hand? No, all right. So I get the last word on this. Just a few things I want to run through. We've had 154 reports in 4 years in this committee, with 48 of them going to cabinet. We've met 44 times in the last 4 years, although we have had a few meetings cancelled, which was from March to June due to COVID. 2 task and finish groups, teacher recruitment and school exclusions. So we've had reports provided by a number of teams within NCC, also Northumbria Police, Northumbria Strategic Safeguarding Partnership, Northumberland College, the CCG, Adopt North East, and the ASYE Academy. What I wanted to say is, like, the role of this committee is to monitor, review and make recommendations about education, social care, training, safeguarding, youth, family and children's services, just to name a few things, and also oversee and monitor school improvement. We know everything isn't plain sailing, but we're prepared to tackle and address those issues that do arise and work towards improvement. And after all, this isn't one of those areas that you can just sit back and it will run itself. It's the hard work and efforts of the officers and all staff and partners involved that make all of this work, and their flexibility to deal with changes as things appear. It's their efforts that have helped Northumberland rise from near bottom of the table up to 79th in the education results in the last few years, and to the top of the tables in the North East. To set up its own social worker academy, producing 44 homegrown qualified social workers for Northumberland, with another 12 due to start. A huge achievement of apprenticeships in this last year at 19% above the national average. A significant reduction in exclusions, the top authority in the country for offering school placements, and so on and so on. So my thanks first to the officers and their teams for the hard work for this committee and the work that they do for Northumberland, and also thanks for all those involved in all areas, including support staff, for helping the people in Northumberland every day. Although only chair of this committee for a relatively short time, I'd also like to thank Ken Stowe for my vice chair, Chris Angus, Leslie, all of Democratic Services, and all committee members for their input to the Scrutiny Committee, one of the few that meet on a monthly basis due to the actual volume of work that it needs to undertake. With the upcoming elections, I understand that some members may have opted not to stand again. I wish them good luck in their retirement. They may opt to do something more serene, like crocodile hunting, backpacking around the world, who knows. And I hope that we get the opportunity to meet again in the next term, and wish everyone well for the future. So as we continue with a careful path out of lockdown, it just leaves me to say for everyone to take care. And finally, I've been told that the last person to join the committee has to buy a round. So even though he's not here, I think the drinks are all on Councillor Dickinson. And with that, I'd just like to say, I'd like to close the committee and goodbye to everyone. Thanks very much.